Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
My conversation today is with the guy behind a new docuseries that I was asked to participate in, and I'm going to get into that. It's called Fall River. It releases this month on the Epix Network, EPIX, the Epix Network. And whether you subscribe to Epix or whether you're going to watch the documentary or not, I still think it's a relevant story, especially because it ties directly into the Satanic Panic of the late 70s through about 1995. And actually, the Satanic Panic is still going on. And we're going to do a separate show next week that just deals with the fear of the devil, where people talk about all the stuff that their parents and pastors and politicians and the culture freaked out about. You know, Satan is everywhere. We're going to do that show. And this kind of ties into that. It might be a little self-serving, I guess. I don't know. I wouldn't do the show if I didn't think it was compelling and interesting and relevant to all the other work that we do. Content warning, this is heavy stuff, very intense stuff having to do with brutal murders, just FYI. Let me start with about a 2-minute clip from the docuseries Fall River.
My beeper went off at close to 6 a.m. in the morning, and they told me to go to Diamond Vocational High School. When I arrived, we had just the EMTs there and uniform division standing by to secure the crime scene. Went under the bleachers where we saw the naked body. If you could see I can see exactly how that looks. She was face down. She was just about completely nude.
There was a lot of evidence at this murder scene. Yeah, I'm just going to tell you what the facts are. This girl had a baseball bat shoved inside of her. She was tied up with fishing wire. Her head was crushed with rocks.
She had been smashed in the face with a gigantic rock, which we did transport to the FBI lab in Washington. They had some sort of a system down there where they could lift fingerprints, but we were unable to get any prints off that rock.
At that point, we didn't even have an idea of who the victim was.
Our intent was to get her identified.
James Buddy Day. He's a Canadian director. He's a writer and producer, the lead guy at Pyramid Productions, which along with Blumhouse is releasing a new docuseries called Fall River on the Epix Network. Blumhouse, a major player, producer of horror films like Get Out, The Purge, Insidious, Sinister. The most recent Halloween film, Blumhouse also behind some other great non-horror films. Whiplash is one of my favorite movies of all time, the Oscar-nominated Black Klansman. But Blumhouse also telling real-world stories. And I guess this docu-series would qualify as a horror story, given the material. James Buddy Day joins me now. Thanks for coming, brother.
Thanks. I'm a long time, first time.
So would you, would you call this a horror story? You know, this, the chronicling of the murders of 1979 and 1980?
Yeah, I mean, it's true crime. So it's an unscripted docuseries in the same vein as The Jinx or any other like it. But it has a definitely scary component. And I think that just comes down to the Satanism aspect of it. You know, these are 3 murders of sex workers in the 1979, 1980. And they were all blamed on Satanism. They had the devil made me do a component, which is one of the reasons, the main reason we interviewed you, and you were fantastic in your interview.
Well, yeah, full disclosure, everybody, I was asked to sit down on camera last fall. You know, you reached out to me and said, hey, I saw your speech on the Satanic Panic. Can you give us some backstory on that time period? You know, coming out of evangelicalism, you know, I was part of that culture. You know, we're burning albums and, you know, we were all sharing the stories. We burned our Ozzy records and we heard the screams of demons. And every Halloween, the Satanists are kidnapping your black cats and virgins. You know, I mean, so that was a real deal. I don't know, is that I don't know when you graduated high school or, you know, what your generation is. Were you part of that?
Well, I'm from Canada, although I guess the Satanic Panic technically, at least in the 90s, originated in Canada.
So
but
the devil never goes to Canada.
Exactly. I was raised not in a religious household. I was raised in a secular household. I did go to Catholic school, but that was more of a geography thing. In the province that I'm from, they have 2 separate school boards, and you kind of go to the school board that you live closest to. And I happen to live in a Catholic school area. So I did go to the Catholic school. In terms of the Satanic Panic, I was aware of it at the time. I mean, I was 18, 19, 20 when that was kind of peaking, when Geraldo was on TV screaming about the devil. So I was aware of it, but, you know, it was on the periphery. It wasn't something I was super invested in.
You weren't steeped
something
in
I
it like some
more
of the rest
became
of us were. Yeah.
interested in, later in life.
Well, I mean, you're a little bit like me. Like, people meet me and I've been called the Mr. Rogers of activism, right? Because I'm just I'm pretty easygoing, right? And I knowing what I know about you, you seem like a really good guy. But I also sort of enjoy the word. I'm compelled by these stories that take us into the dark shades of human nature. Does that resonate with you? Like,
I mean, I remember reading as a teenager, you know, my parents had this big library in our living room. You know, they had a wall of books. And I remember pulling Helter Skelter off the shelf and thinking like, oh, this looks really interesting. And then just reading it and just becoming super fascinated with Charles Manson and then reading every other kind of true crime book I could get my hands on. So I was always really fascinated with the macabre. I've been a huge horror movie fan since I was, you know, as long as I can remember. I've unsuccessfully tried to get my children to watch horror movies. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in dark things for sure. And I think it's because I like to see the spectrum of humanity and I'm very interested in why people believe things they do and what scares people and what doesn't.
My listeners will be interested to know that according to the information I have here, you were the very last journalist to ever interview Charles Manson. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I always blush when people call me a journalist. I don't know that I'm a.
Well, I mean, I would go there. Like you're an investigator, storyteller, a chronicle.
I guess I am.
A chronicler of things. You know?
I am. Yeah, so. For sure. I am.
So I mean, how did you get hooked up with freaking Manson? I mean, how does that happen?
Yeah. So I was I've been doing true crime series for many years, about a decade now, and just nonstop true crime. And I was doing a true crime series, and I had. In the course of that true crime series, I'd met people that had met Manson, and it kind of put this idea in my head that, hey, if you can meet him, maybe I could meet him. So I, on a whim, wrote Manson a letter, and I literally just wrote him a letter, included my phone number, like, hey, give me a call. Not really knowing much of anything, you know, name dropped some people we had met in common. And then I was at an Applebee's with the director of photography who I was filming with at the time in Florida, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and you know I was like, oh my God, I think Charles Manson is calling me. Wow. And ran out of the Applebee's and left the waitress. You know, the waitress was like, come back. She thought we were ditching our tab. And the DOP was like, no, like he's getting a call from Charles Manson. We just got to.
Oh, I'm sure that went over. Yeah. That actually informed, though, a documentary. Was it a series or a film, or what was that?
I ended up doing 3 over the course of, and I ended up doing 3. That was the very beginning, and then I ended up doing 3 documentaries and writing a book. So the first documentary was called Charles Manson: The Final Words in 2016. I did a follow-up documentary after he died, which was called Charles Manson: The Funeral, which I made with his grandson and all the people involved in his funeral. And then I did a follow-up documentary a couple years later with the women, called Manson: The Women, that I did with, if you're familiar with the Manson case, with Lynette Frum, who's Squeaky, Sandra Good, Gypsy, who's named Catherine Scher, and Snake, who's named Diane Lake. And so I did a documentary with them years later. And then I wrote a book about the whole thing.
I will come back to Fall River in just a second. Just FYI, sure. One of my favorite series on Netflix, which has been at least temporarily discontinued, it's called Mindhunter. Mm-hmm. And it's these FBI profilers, and they interview in season 2 Charles Manson, and Damon Harriman is the best on-screen Charles Manson I have ever seen. Yeah. Did you see that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's bang on. I mean, that's what he was like. I talked to Manson a lot, and that is what he was like. He would kind of ramble and riff and talk about all sorts of things. He'd always compare himself. I know your interest in religion. He'd always compare himself to Jesus and talk about his mother and Mary and all this kind of stuff. He'd always kind of go there. It was very interesting.
Would you link him to? I know this is before 1970, whatever, but would you link him to the Satanic Panic? Was there a Satanism element to the Manson murders?
Absolutely, there was. Actually, it's something that I did not cover in any of the stuff I did. But, the prosecutor, his name was Stephen Kay. He was one of the lead prosecutors in the case. He told me off camera once, he said, if we were trying the Manson family murders today, it would be all Satanism. And he said, what we didn't understand was that Manson was satanic and that he committed these murders in the name of Satan. Now, none of that's true, but it definitely linked into the idea of the Satanic Panic. I mean, Anton LaVey was big in the area very, very shortly before the Charles Manson murders. And then when those murders happened, the idea that they were satanic was a very big theme in the press. And then when it got to trial, it turned into more of a cult situation, and it didn't really get explored. But when you go through the court transcripts, even though Satanism wasn't a big part of the trial, they definitely refer to them as satanic at trial, although the religion aspect of it is never explored. Talking here with James Buddy Day. He is the director-producer of the new docuseries Fall River on Epix. There does seem to be this tendency we see the horrors, right? The inhumanity of humanity. And we're like, well, that's got to be satanic. I mean, and when you read about the murders of 1979 and 1980 in Fall River, my first inclination, I think, as someone who believed in the forces of the light and the dark, good and evil, would have been, that's just straight up evil with a capital E. It's got to be Satan. And I think that's part of the angle that you're taking, right? The cultural milieu at the time was, holy God, that we've never seen anything like this. This is next level evil. It's got to be Satan, right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is something, I know for people who haven't seen the documentary, you say in the documentary, you said something to the effect of, when you have a community that's primed to believe in the devil, it's not a big leap to believe the devil is killing people. And, I thought that's bang on. That's exactly what happened is you had these murders. The murders were brutal. The murders were savage. They were uncharacteristically violent for the area, even though it was a violent area. Now, if I may jump in quickly, and I'm sorry, brother. Yeah, no problem. Can you just give me the bullet points, the framework of specifically who was killed in what relative time frame? I want to make sure that those not familiar with Fall River know what we're referencing here. Yeah, so the first murder took place in 1979. It was a 17-year-old woman. She was a sex worker. Her name was Dorian Levesque. Fall River is a very small community in Massachusetts. It's about an hour outside of Boston. And she had come from a neighboring town to work as a sex worker on the streets of Fall River. The reason she did that is because Fall River had a very big sex trade as opposed to the other communities. So you could make a lot more money as a sex worker in Fall River. So she'd come to Fall River. Someone picked her up in the middle of the night and literally stoned her to death. She was found at a local high school, killed with rocks, and someone had bashed her head in with a large kind of concrete stone. That was the first murder. And then there was another murder that took place a couple months later in very similar circumstances, only about 2 miles away. And then a third murder took place 2 months after that. The third murder was another sex worker named Karen Marsden. And Karen Marsden, her body was never found. And it was believed at the time that Karen Marsden was involved in a satanic cult that had committed all the murders, and that her murder was to cover up for the first one.
So the story was that, they were off in the woods doing these, dark satanic deeds.
What the police concluded is that a local pimp had turned the sex workers into not just sex workers, but into a satanic cult, and was using Satanism, his connection to the dark powers of Satanism, to control these women, and occasionally sacrificing them to Satan, as one would do. And that was kind of the motivating factor underneath all these murders.
Now, I'm not telling anybody anything. I'm not spoiling anything when I talk about Carl Drew, the man convicted for the murders. I was interested when I was researching, like after you contacted me, I want to do my due diligence and find out, I don't know much about Fall River. I grew up during the Satanic Panic, but I'd heard about the McMartin trial and some of the other things that had happened, but not this crime. And I was struck by how little there was about it out there until recently. And I'm guessing this is a result of what you guys are doing. Did you have that experience? Like when you were out there digging on your own, did you think, holy shit, nobody's talking about this stuff, right?
Yeah. So, I first heard about the story, and the story I heard was that a pimp named Carl Drew ran a satanic cult in 1979, 1980 Fall River, and had murdered at least 2, if not 3 women as part of this satanic cult, and that he had been found guilty, and there was tons of evidence, and he went to prison forever. That's about as much as you can read online.
I was looking, not that I read Murderpedia, but it pops up in a Google search, right? So I type in Carl Drew or Fall River murders, and Murderpedia comes up. And they say this, and I made a note.
Sure.
It said, a cultist and pimp who organized his stable as a satanic coven and sacrificed young women who displeased him. Now, this is like a matter-of-fact statement about the man, and that essentially is a biography that has lasted for 40-some years. But your docuseries is saying, we don't know all the information.
Yeah, so I contacted Carl a number of years ago, and he, the first thing he said was that he was innocent, that he had nothing, that none of this is true, that there was no satanic cult, that he didn't kill anyone. Now that's I talk to inmates a lot. That's something you hear a lot, is that they didn't do it.
I was framed kind of thing, right?
Yeah. That was one of the first, Manson was adamant he was innocent, but that's not uncommon that you hear that. So I talked to Carl, I listened to his story. I talked to his attorney, and then I said, and Carl said, I had nothing to do with this. His attorney backed him up. His attorney said, no. His attorney was retired at the time. He said, no, Carl is innocent. At the time, Carl had all his legal documents were in the basement of his then girlfriend in Fall River. So we literally flew to Fall River and just got these boxes out of her basement and went to Kinko's and digitized them and started going through them. And then that began 3 years of research into the case. And when you get into the case, proving Carl Drew's innocence is not that hard, but then opens the door to, if Carl Drew really didn't murder these women, if there was no satanic cult, then what happened? And so that was kind of where we started.
Here's another about 1 minute clip from the documentary Fall River.
Lots of people in prison say that they're innocent. 25 years ago, I met Carl Drew, 15 years after he'd been incarcerated. What sticks in my craw, what still gives me a lump in my throat, is knowing that he remains in prison. This injustice will haunt me until I die, until he dies, or until he's released. And I appreciate your efforts to document what happened to Carl.
That was one of my biggest fears in life, is going to prison for a life sentence. especially something I didn't do. I mean, I ain't sitting there saying I was no innocent, no angel. I mean, I did stuff. I told them from the get-go. I said, if you're going to get me for something I done, don't fabricate.
I was interested in the documentary about the Fall River Police Department. Actually, I was yelling at the screen at a specific point when they're essentially watching child prostitution happen in Fall River. And I'm thinking, whoa, how did I read that right? Did I watch it correctly?
Yeah,
We've got a blasé attitude about child prostitution in this city in 1979 and 1980.
Yeah, it's hard. That was one of the big questions we wanted to ask. And one of the big questions we address in the 4-part series is that, how it's just like the zeitgeist, the culture, like what was going on. And essentially you had this town in Massachusetts where it was just riddled with crime and prostitution. And, I remember the detective saying on Friday, Saturday nights, there'd be traffic jams downtown because you'd have all these kind of Johns lined up in cars, just like looking for these sex workers who were just very out in the open. Ironically, the main source of the main corner for the women to stand out on was across the street from the police department. You could, but it just was kind of tolerated for some reason. And they just didn't have any appreciation for these women as victims. And unfortunately, a lot of them were underage as well.
You think that's a product of the time period? Everybody's sweeping that stuff under the rug, or I don't know.
I think it's definitely that's part of it. We did speak to a female detective at the time. She was like the only woman on the police force. I mean, it was a very boys' club kind of attitude. I think they just didn't see prostitution as a problem. It clearly was, but they just felt like, well, we got bigger fish to fry. We got murders. We got other things to worry. I mean, that's a horrible way to look at it. And the fact that these women's plights were so ignored is shocking. So it's hard to understand.
I think probably you and I line up. Like, we're not shaming sex workers, but I think it was more about, that was a culture where, many of these people were being essentially beaten up and threatened every day. They were living in moment by moment danger, often at the hands or fists or whatever of the people that were ostensibly protecting them. I mean, it was just a culture of danger, of violence toward women. I think that's probably my biggest issue, right? That's
exactly it. And it's hard to understand given what we know now and given the morals and the context of current day society. It's hard to look back at it and understand how and why they didn't do anything. And it's something we confront them about in the series. It's something we talk about a lot in the series is, especially when you consider the main witness for the murders was a 17-year-old girl who had suffered horrendous abuse that she told the police about, and they just didn't seem to care. They didn't not care about it, but they didn't think it required any action of any sort. And even to this day, they still don't really see her as a victim, which was another kind of shocking thing.
It's interesting to watch Fall River. I'm trying to watch it dispassionately. It's weird. I mean, I know you are involved on camera at some point in the in episode 4, I believe. Is it weird seeing yourself on? You're like, I'm usually behind the camera, or I'm producing, I'm storytelling, and so I'm trying to detach myself and watch it like the viewer does, and at the same time I'm like, oh God, I hope I come off okay, right? I do. I am on camera a little bit in episode 4. That was just more kind of an organic thing. I think you needed to be there to help propel that chapter. It didn't seem vain to me.
No, the truth about the docuseries is that we researched it for 3 years. It was a 3-year journey to get to the end of it through COVID and everything else. And as we were doing this, we literally discovered things. We uncovered new evidence. We put pieces together that hadn't been put together before. And so it just that's what happened. So we just kept documenting that. That was never the plan to do that, but that was that.
But as I was watching, and I'm trying to, again, be as objective as I can be, I found myself struck by the fact that sometimes we are in this weird position where we are being advocates for justice and in some ways defending, there are no heroes in this story. Like Carl Drew is not a hero, right? You look at many of these often violent and occasionally horrible human beings, And there are people on the outside in the periphery who would be like, well, why in the world would you ever waste your time? Why would you ever give them? Why would you care if they were doing life in prison? You know, and I find that an interesting thing where we make these moral judgments. How do we decide who we defend and who we don't? I don't know. Did you go through any of that when you were?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, Carl Drew was no saint. I mean, Carl Drew was a pimp in the 70s in Fall River before he was arrested. He beat women. He treated them horribly. He exploited them. He did a lot of bad things, but that doesn't make him a murderer. You know, he's not in prison for all those things he did. Maybe he should be, but he is in prison for a murder that he didn't commit. And so, you know, our justice system is only as good as how we treat the worst of us, right? So for me, I mean, yeah, we definitely looked at all that, and I can't defend Carl Drew's character, but I can defend the fact that he didn't receive a fair trial then. He has never received a fair trial, and he remains in prison for something he clearly didn't do.
I'm interested in the nature-nurture thing. Let's get philosophical, all right? I mean, you dealt with these people. I come from a culture where, you know, some people are just born bad. And I think this is a way for us to excuse not thinking, right? We put them in a tiny box. Yeah. There are good people. There are evil people. But one thing I really appreciate about the Fall River docuseries is that you do not shy away from sort of the nurture aspect or lack of nurture. Often the monsters among us are made, and you guys address that head on.
I think that's definitely a theme in the series, is that all these people are products of their environments, and the system and the trial and everything is just a product of their environment. And when you kind of look at someone's backstory and unpack it and unravel it and really understand their trajectory, understand where they're coming from, it changes everything. And one thing that did happen in Fall River in 1979 is that they definitely were looking for neat little boxes to put people in. Carl was a Satanist. He was a killer. This person was a witness. This person was that. And the truth is very complicated. And when you really sit back and look at everything, it paints a completely different picture.
I'm reminded of the Errol Morris documentary from 1988, The Thin Blue Line.
Yeah.
Where, you know, he sort of stumbled into this story, the conviction of Randall Adams for the murder of a Texas police officer. And Adams is doing life. He's totally exhausted all of his options kind of thing, you know, and yet it was the telling of his story in a documentary that actually sort of reopened everything. And the white hot light of scrutiny then returns all these years later. And I see a similarity, I think, in what you're doing. People are starting to take notice, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. We you know, towards the end of the series, we began working with the Massachusetts Innocence Program and turning our findings over. And we're very, you know, we hope the documentary does some good, and we hope that it advances Carl's case and Robin's case. Robin Murphy is the other person featured in the documentary. We hope it advances both of their cases. They're both in legally perilous situations. But, you know, the nice thing about Massachusetts is they do have kind of this fundamental law in their justice system that if they can discover that a case is wrong, like that there's been an injustice done, they do strive to overcome it. They strive to right things. So I hope people watch it. I hope it makes a difference.
You know, I don't want to give away any more, but I will say that I kind of wish I could like have a dozen of my friends watch the docuseries, and then we all get together and we all just talk about it, right?
Like
because I mean, these are complex, layered people. Who do you trust? How do you know they're telling the truth? Which is credible? What's not? Which witness was, you know? And there's so much going on that you and I could talk about. But I'm like, whoever wants to see it, we'll all get on Discord at some point, and we'll all just talk about it because I'm totally curious. The docuseries is called Fall River. It releases on Epix. I encourage you to check it out. It is a compelling story rooted in a time when people were really freaked out about the devil. And that freak out informed, I think, the attitudes both locally and nationally over this horrible series of crimes. So, James Buddy Day, thanks for talking to me here. Thanks for telling the story. And we'll watch and see what happens next, okay?
Great. Thanks, Seth.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. For a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming Free Thought events and conventions, log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.